Evidence we have is Eliza Pratt and Dr. Morton married in 1791. But and we also have evidence that competent evidence that Charles Carr Kerr was married in 1801 and was 1800 and was a father in 1801. So if he was born under all the regular rules of marriage, he would have been 10 years old when he was a father, 11 years old when he was a father. And that completely ignores the other evidence that dates him as being a young man back as early 1788. So, I mean, that doesn't even follow. He'd have to be born of Eliza Pratt outside the marriage. Eliza Pratt was living at Twickenham with him, but it doesn't seem like Eliza Pratt, we don't know if Eliza Pratt took off when she got pregnant and hid away from Lady Savile until she died. Doesn't really seem like it, right? Now, John Chatlow asserts, he himself, but again, we don't know what his knowledge is, or if he had sufficient competent evidence to make this assertion, that Dr. Morton said that Charles Carr was his ward. And he does say that over there. Doctor calls his ward. He also asserts later on, in 1800, when he gets married, that the Irish estate that Dr. Morton left to Charles Carr required that he assume the name and arms of Morton. However, he should be called. That makes absolutely no sense, unless, of course, he wasn't his natural son. John Chatlow also says that Charles Carr Kerr was the natural son of Eliza Pratt. Well, that could actually be true if Eliza Pratt was previously married to a man named with the last name Carr, but the only problem is on the marriage certificate she signed it Eliza Pratt. Nothing else. She's always termed as a single woman, and even in the marriage record she's termed as a single woman. So, and she's also termed as a near relation to Mary Pratt, so it would seem to me she was born with the name Eliza Pratt, although I haven't found a birth record for that. And the last piece of evidence we have is that Dr. Morton and Eliza Pratt were married in 1791, but I already mentioned this. Charles Carr was already already had his first child in 1801. Make him 10 years old as a father, it doesn't make any sense. And so when you look at the totality of the evidence, obviously Dr. Morton when he called Charles Carr his son, it's his adopted son. He just didn't say it was his adopted son in the will. And obviously when Eliza Pratt in 1979 was talking about Mr. Morton to go in the Guards or not, she was assuming that Dr. Morton was going to adopt this child and have every intent to, and it's reasonable to believe Dr. Morton would have told her that. Again, I don't see any evidence that's contradictory. I don't see sufficient competent evidence to say that the assertion that John Chatlow makes of Charles Carr's parentage is free of materialist statement. In fact, I have sufficient competent evidence to say it is materially misstated. And so even though a lot of people have accepted this as the answer, the correct answer to their search is, who are the parents of Charles Carr, they've clearly drawn the wrong conclusion based on the evidence that I've seen. So I don't, I can only imagine one scenario where it could actually be true. And then also he asserts over here that when Charles Carr Kerr Morton decided to ask to marry Charlotte, John Chatlow had a catch-22 as to whether he should consult Eliza Pratt about the marriage because he didn't know whether he knew that he was under the impression that Mrs. Morton had no idea that he knew that Charles Carr was his, the natural son of her, and Charles Carr didn't want to consult her on it. That was just the custom of the day. So that was his catch-22. Should he go ahead and say, "Hey, I know you're his real mom, so I'm gonna let you know about this thing that your natural son doesn't want to tell you." Well, it isn't really a catch-22 because even adopted children, if you adopt someone, you can treat them as your own, and so I don't see why this was a catch-22. But he expresses it as such here in his diary in 1799. So anyway, that's the totality of the evidence, and my conclusion is, especially with Dr. Morton having worked at the family hospital or having at least an association with it, that Dr. Morton adopted Charles Carr. At least with the evidence I have. Now, until such time that I can get DNA from one of the male descendants of Charles Carr, which includes my boss, and gets back and it shows a match to Morton DNA without any question or any exception across anywhere in the world, then obviously what happened is that I said this is the evidence doesn't really. The evidence supports this as an analytical possibility, but not a certainty, that Dr. Morton could have had an affair with Eliza Pratt, and she could have went off and either with Mary Pratt accepting or not accepting the fact, but it still doesn't even pass the muster of analytical review. There's no explanation as to why his last name would be Carr. Tatlow clearly explains here that he had to change his last name. Arms and name of Morton, by which he must, hereinafter be called. And so there's just really no explanation at all whatsoever why he would be called Carr, even if he indeed was the product of Dr. Morton and Eliza Pratt, as John Tatlow asserts here. So that is the situation. That's the application of this. Would it pass? So that assertion would not pass the muster of an audit, and it wouldn't pass the muster of a review. It merely would be compiled, and it probably would. There'd probably be several warnings attached to that if it was in any kind of repository. Stating what the only possibility is that this could actually, what he's saying could be true, is that Dr. Morton would have had to make that last name Carr up for whatever reason is unknown. Why he would even do that, why he would never tell his son, why his mother would never tell his son, is completely unexplained. But obviously, if there were no variations in Morton DNA, then clearly he would be the son. So my answer is I can't exclude it as a possibility, but certainly doesn't seem like it's possible at all. Using audit techniques, this fails completely. This is completely as far as I know, this is an untruth, and that's it. That's all I have to say. So that's the application of audit experience. It doesn't survive the muster of analytics, direct evidence. It's just merely an assertion, which would go under the class of compiled. So it would not be held by the organizing body. I'm sure that the dispute resolving body would look at these factors and come to the same conclusion. So it'd be pretty much in a category of doubtful / disputed, at least to my mind. And I'm doing this in the fairest manner. I have no blood relation to the Mortons. I have no desire to prove or disprove. I'm not trying to disprove anything. I'm not trying to prove anything. That's basically the way it is.